Hi everyone. So in this interview, we are diving into the dynamic realm of healthcare technology with Adeyoola Adeniji. Currently an associate at LRV Health, Yoola holds an MBA from Yale School of Management and boasts an impressive background at Cohere Health, Mass General Brigham, and more. Join us as we tap into Yoola's wealth of experience, explore collaborative models in healthcare tech, connect startups with industry giants, and gain insights for early stage founders. So, Yoola, over to you. How do successful healthcare tech startups strategically align with the industry, and what critical criteria should startup founders prioritize to ensure a strong balance between both financial objectives and broader societal impact?
Yeah, thanks for having me, Somini. Excited for this conversation. I think that to ensure strategic alignment with the industry, it's important to look at the macro trends that are driving healthcare. I think from a demographic standpoint, an epidemiological standpoint, a regulatory standpoint, it's important to understand what's at play, because ultimately that's what's going to drive the healthcare needs that are on the horizon, the healthcare services that are likely to be utilized in coming years, and what the government, which is the largest payer for healthcare, is prioritizing. So ensuring that the problem statement that you're tackling is really in line with some of those trends, I think is a good place to start. The financial outcomes are obviously important, and making sure that whatever you're building, you can do so sustainably is, obviously paramount. And so I think that you want to understand who your buyer is within the context of healthcare. There are a number of buyers that exist, including the payer, the provider, the patient, and even others in the ecosystem. So answering that question and having a strong rationale as to why that's who you're targeting for your particular offering is key. And then starting to think about, if this is something you can deliver under sustainable unit economic conditions.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Now, for early stage founders in the healthcare tech sector, what general advice or recommendations do you have during the venture capital fundraising process? And are there any universal qualities or milestones particularly attractive to investors in this space?
Yeah, it's a good question, especially because the VC fundraising process can be quite opaque. So I'm glad that we're having this conversation. I think the specific milestones are going to vary from fund to fund. But I do think at a high level, there are some areas that a founder wants to be thinking about and answering a number of questions around. So one is broadly the market and their go-to-market strategy. As we talked about a little bit earlier, one big question to answer is who is the target buyer who's going to pay for this particular solution? And you want to understand the dynamics within a given market that are informing that purchasing decision for that person. What segment of this overall buyer population do you think that you can reach? How do you entrench your product or your service within that market and grow it over time? Are there other broad movements in the market that you should be aware of that are influencing the dynamics? And then what are the barriers, facilitators to adoption? And how do those scale over time? I think the other big bucket to think about is just the business model. So getting down to the nitty-gritty mechanics of how this actually works. What is the core product or service? What is the buyer's willingness to pay for this type of product or service? What cost structure is in place to deliver this? And how does that change over time, or how does that change with scale? I think having a very solid business model and very thoughtful responses to those types of questions is important, and I think is in line with what investors are thinking about and are likely pressing founders on.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Now, reflecting on successful collaborations, how can healthcare tech startups effectively connect with incumbent players in the industry to drive transformative outcomes?
Yeah, I think that partnering with incumbents is especially key within the context of healthcare. I think LRV is uniquely positioned in this area because we have a deep and distributed network of strategic limited partners, including healthcare systems, payers, other vendors in the ecosystem. And we are really striving to be transformative partners to them in collaboration with entrepreneurs, builders, innovators within healthcare. I think that, emerging companies and founders within the space should think about this framework that a lot of these incumbents are using to make decisions, and that's buy, build, partner. It's often mentioned, investment in innovation circles. which is that these institutions are thinking about whether or not these are solutions that they should buy or look to find externally. They're considering whether or not they can build that internally, or they're looking to potentially partner around co-developing or co-incubating a type of solution that is meeting their needs or challenges. And so thinking about how your solution or offering is likely to fit into that decision scheme, thinking about the incentives for particular incumbents or entities within the space, and then being creative around collaborating and partnering with these entities, I think is key and makes a huge difference around overall impact.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Now, in contributing positively to the healthcare sector and society, what key metrics or goals should healthcare tech startups monitor to demonstrate their impact?
I think to measure impact, I'd point people to just a high level framework called the quintuple aim, put out by Don Berwick and some of his colleagues. So at a high level, he outlined 5 areas where he feels like the health system should be moving forward in. And those are patient experience, population health outcomes, cost efficiency, the well-being of the care team or the provider, as well as health equity. So the specific metrics or indicators under those categories are going to vary for, a particular company. But I do think that's a good high-level framework to think about how you measure and evaluate impact of what you're building.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Now, given the dynamic landscape of healthcare technology, what are the key trends or technologies that startup founders should anticipate as impactful in the coming years? And how can they position their ventures to stay ahead in these areas?
Well, I'll start with the obvious one that everyone is talking about, which is artificial intelligence or AI. So, there's obviously been a lot of increased attention around that space, especially given, increased buzz around generative AI. I think there are a lot of resources and perspectives around the applications of AI, particularly within the context of healthcare. So I'll just briefly highlight that for a founder building in this space, I think understanding the structure of data in healthcare is pretty key. There are, obvious nuances there. There's complexity there. So understanding all of those factors and the dynamics around ownership of data, distribution of data, and security is important to think through if you're thinking about those AI applications in healthcare. And then thinking through, like many people have mentioned, there are a number of use cases and which of those use cases are likely to be adopted first and by who. The other important area is around value-based care. This has been a trend in healthcare that we've been talking about for a while, but I do think that there will continue to be a lot of movement in this space and a lot of pressure around how we can deliver these innovative or deploy these innovative care models at more sustainable costs. I think that pressure is just going to continue, and we'll also start to see some of that movement across some of the specialty care areas that exist within healthcare.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Now, any final piece of advice for founders?
I think that ideally the factors that we've talked about today kind of capture questions to be thinking about. Staying curious and staying humble in this space is key. Things are constantly changing, and there are a number of dynamics and incentives to be aware of. That's pretty critical to how you go to market, how you plan to reach your target buyer, and ultimately how you plan to drive impact within healthcare. I think it's the best industry to be in. So
thank you so much for sharing that. And I'm so glad that you could join us today, because this channel is all about helping early stage startup founders, build something great. And obviously bringing VC perspective to the conversation obviously helps them a little bit more. So thank you so much. And I hope you enjoyed this conversation as well.
thank you.